Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 13 years now. My role is to look at the effect of AI, data and tech right across the built and natural environment, and with over 110,000 members working right across the land and property lifecycle, from land planning and development, construction, brokerage, valuation, finance, asset management, building operation, building surveying. It's obviously a hugely wide canvas upon which AI, data and tech is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members work right across all the major asset types, whether that's land itself, commercial, residential, alternative assets and infrastructure. And today I'm really happy to have Harry join me from BuildPrompt. So welcome to the discussion, Harry.
Hi, Andrew. Great to see you, and thanks for inviting me along.
Pleasure, Harry. Now, I always start with before we get into the bits and bytes, it'd be great to get a bit about your backstory and BuildPrompt and how you got involved in AI.
Yeah, brilliant. So interestingly, my background is actually very much focused on construction initially, working for various different house builders, getting a construction management degree, working in project management roles. And then we ultimately ended up creating a snagging software that enabled people all around the world to make defect reports, punch lists as they call it in the States, and improve their quality control on their projects. The product ended up being quite popular with around 2 million images logged worldwide. And so that kind of really opened our eyes up into the value of having a large data set and what you could do with that. And so it was around, I think it was around 2019, we started looking at some potential partnerships of how we can research how the built environment was going to change. And then we ended up looking at working with some universities. We did some work with, for example, with Cardiff University, trying to understand how we could take data sets to train large language models or create machine learning functions that would enable people in the built environment to complete their job better. And what happened was that as I kind of got my head more and more into AI and understanding maybe the implications, the benefits, and how different companies were going to benefit from it, I soon kind of realized that there was going to be something huge that's going to happen. And, there's a lot of noise now around ChatGPT and all the recent innovations that have occurred. And to kind of look at the landscape in 2020 and potentially see that coming, it was soon that I realized that the biggest opportunity was going to be that organizations with large data sets were going to be able to surface information and find how they were going to work, who's responsible for what type of contract, what's pertained within a lease. All these things that I saw were going to massively impact the built environment. And so we, in mid-2022, came up with the idea that we could train models on an organization's data. And we searched around, looked for different opportunities, and there was really nothing providing the tool that we wanted. And so we ultimately ended up finding that aviation was the most advanced in this area. Mm-hmm. We found a team who had got some great experience building products for some of the most advanced companies in the world of aviation. And so we began to partner with them to really accelerate our vision for how companies in the built environment, organizations in the built environment, can utilize their data to surface information instantly in any language, and also enable them to then develop insights and custom workflows that would benefit them. So that kind of leads us here today. Since we launched the product kind of mid of last year, it's been quite an interesting journey with, it's clear now, everyone can say now that, AI is moving quickly and there's a lot of impact it's going to have. So it's quite interesting for us to kind of sit at the forefront of that and see exactly how it's going to impact everyone listening to this, for example.
Indeed. Now, Harry, when you and I discussed the kind of themes we talk about today, I thought it was very brave of you to take on the question that how would you see AI technology evolving in the coming months and years and decades? So give us your predictions.
Yeah, I'll give you my prediction because it is very obviously unknown to anybody, right? Of course. And so, what's interesting is that AI was really the ugly child. People just were not interested in it. Obviously, I think really most people could agree that it was Alan Turing in the 50s who really started accelerating with the understanding of what AI is, how it could impact the world. It was not until I think it was the 80s that the neural network really started to come into fruition. And then, in the mid to early 2000s, deep learning became more prominent. And I think when deep learning came about, it was clear that there was going to be mass application for AI, but still, because it wasn't as good as most people at doing that kind of work, it was really kind of brushed off. But I would say that then leading up to 2017, when essentially the advent of the transformer kind of came about, and GPTs, as you know them today, started really to be built, the speed of acceleration has been quite phenomenal. And so ChatGPT was ultimately released in November 2022. And so if you look at the kind of timeline of AI development, it's been condensed at the top. And so when I look forward into now, tracking back on how AI has changed and how it's going to change, the stuff we're seeing with our research partners is that really multimodal AI is going to transform everything. There'll be less uses of AI, for example, like that you're just using for text only, and instead it will become very broad. And so people have been able to use voice, people have been able to use images, videos. People, the Apple are releasing their own smart glasses, right? And it's going to be, there's a lot of up and down movements on whether people think that's a good idea, whether it's healthy for the people. But this occurrence happened even when the iPhone was released. People thought, oh no, this is not good. People are going to be on their phones all the time. And so I see AI now as really merging with the world. And so that means that people will be wearing AR glasses in the future, where their glasses can detect the environment around them. They can understand, they can have AI agents that are essentially like a version of BuildPrompt that's analyzing data around them in their work, to then provide them instantaneous kind of insights and trends that are happening in their job and feed that back to a wider hub of an organization's AI. And so I think that the main thing, Andrew, is that although no one can predict where it's going to go, I think it's going to become much more consuming of everything that people are doing day to day in terms of benefit in their life, providing shortcuts into doing their job, which is beneficial when you think of it net. But also then that means that people will have to become more aware of how they can use AI to do their job better or risk being left behind.
I mean, obviously we're here to sort of focus to a large extent on the built environment, and you've also mentioned the kind of research and partners you've worked with in aviation, and I suppose you've also alluded to that kind of consumer experience. But do you have a view in terms of which particular kind of industrial sectors will be most effective and affected? And I guess I'm going to take it as read that the built environment will be, but do you see any other sectors, given the kind of horizon scanning you're doing, that will be, in your view, particularly affected by the rise of the continuing rise of AI?
Yeah, I think the most impressive at the minute is when we look at automotive. I think that the work that various different kind of electric car manufacturers are completing, maybe say Tesla for instance, Tesla have had an ongoing battle where they're trying to bring self-driving to life. And have constantly kind of misstepped on their estimations of when that will occur, when people can do that safely. And it's actually, for Tesla to get to the point today, they processed over 1.5 million hours of good car driving via Tesla drivers, to then inform how their cars could be driven through self-driving. Even now with that, it's not perfect. But so when I look at the landscape, I see that the industries that can have the biggest data sets already, which is, the Elon Musk of the world with Tesla, who have got millions and millions and millions of hours of footage of their cars being driven, are going to benefit the most from this and accelerate the quickest. We also see healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry being massively disrupted. Whether that is using AI to establish perhaps looking to cure diseases, looking to cure illnesses, even with the advent now of mRNA, for example, it's these things will be accelerated by deep learning. And so in terms of the wider landscape, day-to-day shopping through e-commerce, people already use things like Alexa and so on to start shopping on Amazon and so on. And so I think voice via people's devices, if people do a job where currently they're spending a lot of time typing, where they're spending a lot of time doing manual work, this is going to be massively enabled by either robotics or better interpretation of what it is people want through semantic searching, whether that's voice or anything really.
And Harry, what you've alluded to this kind of point a little bit earlier in our conversation, but it's obviously a kind of an interesting question that many people would like to know the answer to. And obviously, it's once again, it's hard to exactly predict the future. But how do you see the effect of AI on people's jobs and roles and skills? Because clearly there will be, and there's already concern about the implications for replacing roles, replacing jobs. What's your view? Are you the sort of glass half empty or glass half full on this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that there was, even when social media came into fruition, right, and really in the early 2000s, people thought that social media would now mean that so many jobs would be taken in the media world, and they thought that Netflix would replace Hollywood, right? And there's always this advent of new tech where people fear that their job's going to be taken, and so I think there'll be some jobs that can never be replaced by AI, and they will just be enhanced. I think there's a spectrum then, if you look at the landscape, where there's certain jobs, particularly maybe in standardized, mundane kind of works that could be done by a robot, for example. They're the ones that will probably be replaced, but people will need to manage those supply chains still. People will need to check the data that the AI is putting out. People will need to really hold the hand of the AI. And so if you think of it like, we always make the comparison that, if you think about how AI works, it's literally like a parent teaching a child. It's looking at patterns, it's understanding, okay, that's how you do it, that's how I should do it. And so just as then when a child grows up, then the kind of things change, and the child can start enabling the parent to do things. We see it as the same, where then it will always need to be monitored. People will always need to be checking how it's working, but most people, in my opinion, will just be enabled by the advent of AI. So their job will become easier. They can do more in a day, and they can automate more tasks that they maybe don't prefer to do in their day-to-day work. So I think there's definitely some jobs that could be more replaced, but I do think that even if you're thinking about a manufacturing line where it'd be safer for a robot to be used, it's still critical that the data from that, performance of that, whether it's a robot or it's an AI solution, should be monitored and will be monitored by humans. And there'll always be like a chain then where that creates new jobs. And I think that that's the key thing here, is that it's actually just being aware of how to use AI in the right way, even if it's something, basically like using ChatGPT, right? If you're good at using ChatGPT, you're going to be many steps ahead of people who are not even embracing it at all and not looking at it.
Indeed. And I suppose like any advent of a new technology, or a technology that's emerging and becoming so pervasive now, I guess there are always going to be, as well as the huge opportunities, there are going to be some risks that need to be managed. And I guess, what would you say to firms around, what do you think the main concerns they should have when they're beginning to use AI? What kind of guardrails, what kind of things should they be thinking about to make sure that they do it responsibly?
Yeah. So I think there's, from what we're seeing, so we work with a number of companies across different industries in different countries, and we're seeing a very different approach to how they want to use AI. We see from the kind of larger corporates that their fear is, where's our data going? Who's going to benefit from our data? If, for example, if you're using something like an OpenAI product now, you're using an API to send that data over to the Azure service, the OpenAI servers. The AI is digesting that. There is some guardrails that they've put up now around not kind of using that data to train their models, but it is kind of fairly ambiguous currently. And so we see their main fears being is their data going to benefit their competitors? right? Is the work they're doing just going to be a shortcut for someone in their industry to come up behind them? And so what we do is allow people to use our BuildPrompt platform to accelerate their vision for having a closed infrastructure that is fine-tuned to their requirements. Because what that does is alleviates their concerns around data management, data integrity, privacy. And so if they've got visualization of exactly where their data is sitting and how it's working, then you can pretty quickly start to absolve those fears.
And at the risk of getting into some specifics, but I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers will have kind of heard some of the critiques that are presented against AI, and one of these areas is bias, which is quite a pre-existing risk that needs to be managed. But also more recently with these large language models, a lot of people will have heard about the concept of hallucination. I mean, in lay terms, what do we mean by bias and hallucination when it comes to using AI?
Yeah, so there's quite a few different parts to both of those. If we start with bias, if you think about how an AI is originally created, if you think about ChatGPT, it cost around $20 million for them to create ChatGPT, and what they did was they had a data set dump of around 10 terabytes of data. That was basically a scrape of data from the internet that had almost no labeling. It was across Google, news sources, as you see now with the Times suing OpenAI and so on.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is that the AI is crawling that data and digesting it, and creating an initial version of that AI. That data set is so large, it's almost impossible to manage. And so if you look at that data set, there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that is firstly all inaccurate. It may also be that it's leaning a certain political direction. It may be that it's kind of saying things against a certain type of country. It may be a certain type of demographic. And so because it's so vast, it becomes quite hard to tell exactly how the AI is working and which kind of way it's going to start leaning towards. And so that's kind of the data bias areas that you don't really know if it's being influenced in that initial data set, because the data set is so vast. And by the time the AI has processed it, it's literally just a combination of binary code. And so it becomes very difficult to even understand what it has digested. Now they do additional work once that initial set has been trained on, where they use a high quality set of data to then really take the AI and start making it be more diplomatic, I guess, and centralized to not kind of focus on different areas. But because the initial data set was so large, it becomes very problematic then if it has started maybe leaning towards a certain direction, because it will then, all of its responses will be gathered towards that direction. There's then the actual algorithm itself that's used. And so, yes, everything seems quite friendly and above board at the minute. But if you've got the capabilities, if you've got $20 million and you want to create a ChatGPT, you've got access to NVIDIA technology, for example, and the relevant GPUs, then if you're under mindset that you're trying to achieve a certain goal, and that goal is maybe not aligned with the rest of the population, but you've got the resources to do this, then what that means is that you'll be able to adjust the algorithm to start even purposely being biased, right? And start the guardrails come down, and you can start making it so that it performs certain tasks that align with your view of how things should be. I think that's when things will probably get a little bit dangerous. But with the safety AI, EU AI Safety Act and so on, hopefully there's some stuff there that will prohibit that. But it's just so accessible. It's just like the internet, right? It's going to become so accessible to create these models. And then I think another thing to mention on the bias side as well is like the measurement and the accuracy that these solutions have, because when you're interpreting what that data is, what the AI is coming out of it, and you're understanding that you're not actually sure how it's worked, you're not actually sure what data it's putting towards you, there's also then a level of human interpretation that comes with that, and then a feedback loop that's created where essentially if the AI is improving itself using your data, if you're asking a lot of questions that are leaning a certain direction, then the AI will start to slowly lean that direction. And again, there is guardrails to prevent that kind of thing, but it's just so vast that people aren't really sure even how to manage it still and stay on top of it. So that's more generally bias that is quite broad. And then I think one of the biggest problems is hallucination. And hallucination is essentially that on that, if you think about, we'll go back to ChatGPT in this case, is the 10 terabytes of data that was used to create ChatGPT. Not every single answer to every question is in that data set. And not every single specific question is aligned with how the AI will interpret that specific question based on its data set. And so AI is really just a way of predicting the next word as accurately as possible. But ultimately, if you ask now a large language model a question and it doesn't know the answer, most of the time it will still give you a response. And that response we call hallucination, because it will confidently give you a response that is inaccurate. And so that means then that people will, if you think about someone doing their homework and they're trying to find the answer to a certain question and the AI has delivered them a confident response, in a very low level term, that person's going to go, great, well, I trust this AI, so I'm going to write that answer down. That's my response. And then that can really create a chain of events that could be quite problematic because the AI itself doesn't know that it's wrong.
Now, and I suppose it's worth mentioning in the context of, if I can use the phrase, more traditional AI before the kind of advent of, ChatGPT and these large language models, there's still an issue there in terms of when you train an AI model of any description, if the data you give it is biased in some way in terms of either only a subset of what should be the representative sample, there's that danger that bias can get in quite an old-fashioned way, really, isn't it, if you don't give it a representative sample of the data. I guess it'd be interesting for our listeners, and it's a huge topic in terms of AI in all its various flavors, but given there's so much activity now around this kind of large language model, generative AI, could you explain to our listeners and viewers, how does a large language model work? How does this new version of AI work? And you've explained how it's trained on, huge amounts of data, but how is it actually deciding what words to put in one order when you give it that kind of prompt?
Yeah. So the actual AI, if you were to break a large language model down, essentially you could put it down to being 500 lines of code with a very complex CSV file. And so what the process is that the underlying algorithm that is paired between the code and the actual data set that is now in that CSV, that CSV is essentially a vector, and that vector is a combination of binary code, so it's ones and zeros essentially. And so in that 500 lines of code, there's a number of processes that are followed around the best possible way to predict the next word. And so the IP that these large language model creators have, which is becoming more and more accessible today. We're part of the NVIDIA Inception program, where we get first-hand view of creating, large language models, understanding how these, can be used for fine-tuning and so on. And for us, really, when we look at it, it's just a case of who can build an AI who can best predict the next word. And there is some combinations of how the code will pull through the relevant areas. But if you think of it like having a starting point there, an end point there, and in between there's three-dimensional layers of these vectors. The AI, when you ask the question, goes from the first part, and then we'll go through a neural chain to then find the most likely words based on the data set that it's got to then provide an output.
So, ironically, it's not sort of reproducing or writing text like human beings doing, it's kind of mimicking in that sense, and it's using a kind of statistical approach to say, well, what's the most likely word that will come next? So, which I think is a key thing to think about. And one thing I'd like to ask you now, which you kind of once again alluded to earlier in this discussion, is really the fact that obviously ChatGPT and similar tools have really caught the kind of the imagination of people, and they realized the power of this generative approach. But I think people have quite quickly thought, well, okay, they've recognized some of the limitations, bias, hallucinations of the kind of, the open version of ChatGPT. And it'd be good if you could talk us through how people can effectively bring these large language models in-house, get the benefit of the kind of fundamental training, but also then in a secure way, put their more curated data sets into that model and get real benefits, almost kind of get the best of both worlds, get the kind of fundamental power of the large language model, but make sure that they've got that much more high quality curated set of documents and data that they can then use for their own purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really interesting topic for me in particular and for our business, because this is the area that we focus on the most. There's perhaps worth prefacing that there's really two ways to use a large language model. There's using like a something like a ChatGPT or a Claude via an API, which is the area that grew the quickest, but is probably going to get left behind in many ways. The version that although we do enable that with BuildPrompt, the version that we focus on predominantly is taking a open source large language model, and there's a range of them. Interestingly, most people don't realize, but the actual organization who's leading this race is Meta, previously Facebook, with their large language model Llama. It's an open source model that essentially you could download, and if your computer was powerful enough, just run it on your computer offline. So you can access like a ChatGPT equivalent on your computer in your own secure environment without it sending anything to the internet or any area that you're not sure of where it's going, right? And so we focus on predominantly the second version, which is the open source models, because you get provided all of that code, all of the tools to use that, and you can see exactly how they work. It means that then you can start editing the weightings and the parameters that sit within that to advance your own business's objectives. And so what that can mean is that you take the initial large language model that's open source, you look at the data set that's contained within it, and you kind of start at the bottom of that. So maybe the area where there's least relevance to the business or the organization that you're working with. And then essentially what you do is something called fine tuning. And that fine tuning is essentially where you're replacing the existing data set with a new data set. And so that could be leases, it could be information related to planning, it could be information relating to building regulations, and it could be information related to data that you've captured yourself. Because then what you're doing is you're essentially creating your own biased AI, right? That's able to solve specific problems that are very relevant to your business and or organization. And why that's really important is because that is also the biggest way to get benefit from AI is by doing that. But also it's the most worrying, because if you can take this really powerful tools that have been created by these conglomerates and start editing them, although there is some kind of hard-coded guardrails within them, you really can start getting them to solve most problems that you've got in your business, as long as you're being focused with it. So that could be analyzing data, it could be analyzing trends, it could be analyzing, maybe looking at how you've previously done a tender, how you previously curated all of that, what's your best practice one. Well, now we've fed that into the AI, we've fine-tuned it based on that data, and now we want to do this new tender. Here's all the information, can you write this tender for us? And so that becomes possible with fine-tuning, which is not possible really in the truest sense with something like a ChatGPT that you access through an API, or one of their other GPT models and so on.
So back to your specific business at BuildPrompt, what sort of use cases, what sort of things are you working on? What problems are you solving, and for what kind of sectors?
Yeah, so it's quite diverse. We didn't expect it to be quite as diverse as it's happened, to be honest with you. And we thought it would be more of a play that would be focused on maybe some problems related to, let's say you're a construction company, you want to access building regulations, the Building Safety Act. I mean, we do that stuff from the day off, right? People use our platform to upload their warranty providers' technical standards, so they can ask a question, get the answer instantly, and see the exact page that data has come from. But it's kind of accelerated much quicker. And the main areas we're looking at now is, yes, construction and the built environment broadly, also real estate companies. We've got some really interesting work we're doing over in the US with various different real estate companies, particularly around multimodal AI. We've got some work we're doing in the aviation industry, particularly in the UK, with airports, where we're helping accelerate how they access key information that could be to do with maybe incidents that have occurred. It could be to do with the standards that are relevant within the organization. also the law sector is one that's quite interesting for us. We've had quite a lot of interest in that world, and we have a function in our platform where we can essentially automate the review of contracts. Where if you've got we call it a prompt stack. So we've got the prompting function where you can ask a question on your data. It will get a direct response, even if you've written it in the language that the data is not in. We'll evidence that response with the exact page that data has come from, even if it's across tens of thousands of pages. But then we also have this function called prompt stack. And what prompt stack does, it's where you can automate review in a standardized way, where we take the standardized questions you would ask. Let's say it's a specific question you ask on a contract or a lease. And then we basically edit the underlying templates that sit within that using reinforcement learning, which essentially in summary is where you take the ideal responses, the labeled responses, and feed them back in so that then you can get a more standardized output. So then people can essentially crawl their own data sets with our platform and find anomalies, answer questions and solve problems quicker by having it done to exactly their framework. And so now we've started releasing and rolling out that function. It really seems to be expanding further. So as a business, we're trying to understand where we focus more on, because you don't want the spreadsheets have too thin. For us, our main objective here is kind of the built environment and infrastructure. But when the product's so relevant for legal firms, particularly those that work within the built environment, we start to kind of face that in a new direction, where we're trying to solve like a network of problems for these companies, that could be extracting key information from brochures, from leases, from contracts, building regulations, ultimately enabling people to surface any data that they've got instantly, whether they're on our iOS app, Android app, or web platform.
And have you bumped into people, dare I say it, using it the wrong way, using these generative tools in what you would consider a fairly, perhaps not dangerous, but in a way that really isn't going to be particularly helpful, and maybe take them down the wrong direction in terms of how to use these tools?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because prompt engineering now, there was a role that OpenAI were doing themselves, actually. I think it was it was around $750,000 a year to be a prompt engineer. And these people are extremely technical, right?
Yeah.
But there's also much less technical prompt engineers, which is also beneficial in itself for someone to not be too technical in some ways. We've seen a number of ways in which we kind of educate people on using our platform and similar platforms, and we kind of really take a partner-led approach, where we don't just go, look, here's the tools you should use, get on with it. We access all of the relevant large language models, all of the tools available. We have our own proprietary models that we then fine-tune and adjust to meet certain requirements. And what we're seeing is that people kind of want to just ask any question in any format with maybe putting multiple questions in one prompt. And so although you can do that kind of stuff with a large language model, it does then start to bring in hallucinations when you're asking that multiple questions in one and you're taking your own data in. And so really what we see is just people not being quite educated yet on how to write the best possible prompt to get the best possible outputs. But also a lot of work we do is try and make it so that doesn't matter. So spelling mistakes, synonyms, understanding if someone's asking two questions, that they should be segmented off and asked individually, things like that.
Well, I guess I'm going to make a prompt mistake now by kind of bundling a few questions together, Harry, but I'm interested to get your view on how different countries are responding to the use of AI in a kind of regulatory point of view, and what we should be thinking about in terms of regulations, which appear to at the moment to be very kind of patchwork quilt in terms of, the EU, their Safety Act looking at AI. Obviously, there was an executive order from Biden. There'll be the UK looking at it, and so we're faced with a very kind of confusing, I suppose is the right word, but very different set of approaches around the world in terms of custom and practice and regulation. What are your views on that whole kind of patchwork quilt? And I guess particularly that EU Act, which for better or for worse will have that Brussels effect in terms of setting the tone.
Yeah. The landscape's moving very quickly, right? And what's interesting is that if you think of any advanced technology, it's really been a country versus country battle, right? It's which country can get to the moon the quickest, which country can, have the most widely used tech platform, which country has the most popular social media, which country can build the most chips, right, and the most accurate chips, who are the most efficient. And so, what the fear now is that, though, for the first time, if you were to build the most advanced social media platform, there's maybe problems that occur, but there's the net risk is still fairly low, depending on how you look at it. But if you look at AI, the biggest problem here is that if it accelerates too quickly, before relevant regulation has been put in place, the fear that people have is that the AI will become so advanced that it's going to start doing things that it was never supposed to do. And that's already happening now, where you see the creators of these large language models say, well, we just couldn't believe that it could do this. We couldn't believe that it could solve this math problem, this equation. We didn't program it to do this. There was even reports of an AI that had not been trained on any German language at all, and yet had the ability to output information in German. And so they can become fluent in areas where they're not previously kind of purpose built for. And so now when you look at the landscape, the different countries want to build the most advanced AI because they want to be the ones who can benefit from it the most. Obviously, the West, for example, want to be ahead of China, for example. And so there's a thing here where if you stop and regulate too hard, and China aren't doing that, then they will go ahead. However, if you go too fast, then you could be in a case where someone creates an AI that learns how to self-deploy, and then before you know it, is dotted on servers all around the world that are communicating with each other and doing things that you were never expecting them to do. And before long, if the bias is leaning a certain way, or it's been programmed in a certain way, the algorithm is working in a certain way, then it could soon get out of control. And I think that's the main fear that people have with AI, is that some sort of self-deploying function where you suddenly can't just turn it off. And so I think that the goal here, when you think about, like you said, the patchwork quilt that's going on, is that there's a very broad view of, it's a race to the bottom almost. Right? It's how quickly can we build AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is a vision of AI being able to do anything for anyone at any time with no input, and kind of just following along with people's day-to-day life and benefiting them in any way. And so there's a race to get there, but also there's a fear of who's the country that also make the biggest mistake and drop the ball, don't implement relevant guardrails and regulatory compliance, and then the AI goes out of control, and then we have a pandemic on our hands, essentially, where there's a mass scale technology product that is doing things that we never expected, and we can't stop it. So yeah, in I guess when you look at it all, and you spoke about some of the stuff there around Biden's executive order, the EU Safety Act, their focus is good because it's looking at the speed of development and understanding maybe the risks of developing it too quickly, but also then it's looking at core things like making sure that if there's any type of AI that is trying to manipulate people, or is trying to do social scoring, or is using biometrics to advance an organization's own products, or their cash flow, or their how they're moving forward as a business, then that should be heavily regulated. But most other things will then fit within certain categories, and that could be like, does this manage national infrastructure? Does this, does this going to complete work to do with the law enforcement? And so they're kind of focusing on segmenting the two areas. Again, these are high risk ones that could be detrimental, and then ones that are slightly lower risk but still could be dangerous if it went wrong, and regulating them and kind of allowing people then just to go with it, which I think is fairly smart. But also it depends what's happening in other countries, because it could be irrelevant if someone creates a solution that is self-deploying in another country. It would soon be over here, and everything was irrelevant before that.
No, I mean, I suppose it's interesting, is that you can understand that. I think from my personal perspective, the logic of the EU approach, I think, is good in terms of that sense of ranking by risk and looking at the people affected by the model and the level of risk that's associated with it. Because clearly many applications of AI are arguably pretty low risk in terms of who they affect and the kind of decisions it's driving. So I think that kind of risk-based approach is quite attractive. But as you say, it's difficult when this can effectively bleed across borders, can't it, in terms of whether models will be created and deployed. I guess my last question, and we've covered a huge amount of ground here, Harry, it's been brilliant, is if you had a few words or paragraphs of advice, and I hope you won't use ChatGPT to generate them, but what would be your advice to a company that's going to start that journey to looking to use AI for the first time? And I guess my personal view is to kind of start small and look at some use cases where they can begin to evaluate the worth of it rather than trying to do a big bang. But at the risk of prejudging your response, what would you say to a firm?
No, that is, I mean, that's very much aligned with what we do say. So, we sometimes have companies that go into us that are too scared to not use AI because they don't want to get left behind. But also they are, terrified of the implications of using AI because they could be, a company with billions of turnover, thousands of staff, and who's going to be the person in that company that says, oh yeah, we should use AI, and then there's some sort of disaster for that company's brand or data or customers and so on. And so you absolutely hit the nail on the head that I think that companies should definitely be exploring AI. They shouldn't be sending secure, private, or data that could end up being. If you wouldn't say it to a person, I probably would avoid saying it to an AI, particularly if it's a AI that you're using through an API like ChatGPT or Claude. What I'd say is that the best strategy is to start small, as you said. Think about a problem in your business that is really not automated, that probably could be automated, whether that is writing emails, whether that is inputting data, whether that is capturing data, and a range of things like that, reviewing leases, contract policies, procedures, training, all these things. Try and find the area of the business that you'll most benefit from. Start there, and then try and redact data if you're going to use an API, or if you're going to go down the route that we predominantly focus on with BuildPrompt. Look at maybe what resources you have to invest so that you can stay ahead of the curve by partnering with a company like us to tell you what the art of the possible is, and then solve one problem after the other. We've seen some companies that have had terribly failed AI strategies, and the reason that we found it every single time is because they started with a problem so big that they had to think about every single step leading up to that. And instead of doing that, they just start with a big problem and went from the top down. You should start with the bottom and work your way up to that bigger problem. But think about all the things that sit in the way of that you can solve. And so that's kind of what we focus on with that, is that how do you do that in the most secure way possible? Do you need on-premise deployment? Do you need your own fine-tuned model? Is that a waste of money or for you? Or you just biting off way more than you can chew? And so we try and make sure the organizations aren't doing things they don't need to do just for the sake of it. And ultimately, if they are a big company who really want to accelerate the use of AI, then we'll take them on that journey. But if they come to us and they're a smaller company and they tell us they want to use, spend all this money there, we kind of say, actually, no, you could just use our system to redact data, send it to an API, return it, and you're going to be in a great spot because you don't need to invest in fine-tuning models.
Well, very wise words, and I guess I'd also come back to, I think, something you said earlier about the fact that our sector should embrace this, that they should start using it, they should start testing it in that sense, or piloting on small business problems to really understand it and manage the risks, but take advantage of the opportunities. It's a hugely exciting time at the moment. Well, Harry, thanks ever so much for your wise words today. It's been very illuminating, and I look forward to chatting again soon in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Andrew. Really enjoyed it. And look forward to chatting again.